Right, everyone. Welcome to English as a Foreign Language. My name is Chris, and I will be your teacher for today's class. In today's class, we are going to look at the simple present tense, part 1. This lesson is for all levels. Let us not waste any time and get straight into today's class. Let's go to the first section. In the first section, we need to look at when we use the simple present tense. So in which situation do we use the simple present tense? That's the question we need to answer. Now, in answering this question, when do we use the simple present tense? We use it to talk about actions that we do repeatedly as part of our habits or routines. For example, actions we do every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year, every 5 years, and so on. We also use it to talk about the current states in life. Just to explain this further, we use the simple present tense to talk about the things that we usually do in our lives. Now, do not confuse the simple present tense with the present continuous tense. The simple present tense, we use it to talk about things we normally do in our lives, not necessarily the things we are doing now. Because when we talk about the things we are doing now as we speak, that's the present continuous tense, which we are going to do later on. For now, we use the simple present tense to talk about the things we normally do in our lives. For example, if I say, I wake up at 6 a.m. every day, it doesn't mean that I am currently waking up. What it means is, generally, I wake up at 6 a.m. That's what it means. This is my habit. This is my routine. This is how I live my life. So that's the simple present tense. Okay? Now that we know when we use the simple present tense, we can then move to the next section. In this section, we look at the simple present tense verb sentence structure. So we are looking at the structure of the simple present tense. Okay, how do we form a sentence in the simple present tense? Remember, a verb sentence is a sentence that has a real verb in it, as I have explained in the video before this one. Okay? So let's look at that structure. Let's look at the positive verb sentence, meaning a positive sentence, the one that is not negative. The structure is as follows. When we form a sentence in the simple present tense, and the sentence is a positive sentence, we need to first state the subject, and then after the subject, we have to put the verb. Now, the verb that we use, right? The form of the verb that we use is dependent on the type of the verb that we have. Okay, as we will see, we will look at the different types of verbs. Some of these verbs, we have to add es at the end, and other, we have to add ies at the end, and the other, we need to put s at the end. And for some of these verbs, of course, depending on the subject, we do not change them in any way. But we are going to look at the rules that we need to follow, the rules that will help us determine if our verb has to end with an es, or our verb has to end with an ies, or our verb has to end with an s. We will look at those rules after looking at this structure. After using a verb, then you need an object. And then after the object, you have to put other words. Now, in a separate video from this one, I have explained what the subject is. I have explained what V1 indicates. Furthermore, I have explained what an object is, and also what other words means. Okay, so please do look at that video. All right, so we now have the structure of the positive verb sentence in the simple present tense. Let us now look at those rules that help us determine whether our verb has to end in es, ies, or an s. Let's get straight into it. Let's start with rule number 1. So rule 1 says, when do we use V1 plus ES? Meaning, when does our verb end with an ES? So, for subjects, he, she, and it, in simple present tense, for verbs that end with the following letters. So if your verb ends with the following letters and your subjects, or your subject rather, is a he, she, or it, then at the end of that verb, you need to put an ES. So let's look at the list of those verbs in which, in the simple present tense, for these subjects, he, she, and it, right? Then we add ES at the end of those verbs. So which are those verbs? So firstly, any verb that ends with the letters C, H. So C followed by H. What do? We have to add ES at the end of that verb. Remember, That's for subject he, she, it, and in the simple present tense. For example, we have a verb here, watch. So watch ends with C followed by H. So in the simple present tense for subject he, she, it, what do? At the end of this verb, we add es. And it becomes watches. Okay? The next one is if a verb ends with sh, s followed by h. For example, you've got wash, right? Then you add es. It becomes washes. Next up, for any verb that ends with a consonant, any consonant plus o. Again, in another separate video, I have explained what a consonant is. Okay, remember a consonant is any letter which is not an A, an E, an I, an O, or a U. So if your verb in the simple present tense for subject he, she, it ends with consonant followed by the letter O, what do? You add ES. For example, you've got go. So you've got a consonant here, which is a G, plus O. You add ES, it becomes goes. Okay? Next up, for any verb that ends with the letters SS, S followed by S. For example, you've got the verb miss, you add es at the end of that verb, it becomes misses. Right? Let's move right along. For any verb that ends with the letter X, for subjects he, she, it, in the simple present tense, what do? You add es at the end of that verb. For example, the verb fix, it ends with an X, you add es at the end of it, it becomes fixes. Okay, let's move. For any verb that ends with the letters Z, Z followed by another Z. You do the same thing as above. You add es at the end of that verb. For example, bars, it ends with Z. You add es at the end, it becomes buzzes. Okay? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. For any verb in the simple present tense for subjects he, she, and it, if the verb ends with a Z, right? What do? You add another Z, then you will have a double Z. After that, you add ES at the end. How so? Let's say you have a verb, quiz. So quiz ends with one Z. What do? You add a second Z, then you have a double Z at the end. And lastly, you add es, then it becomes quizzes. So the rule that we just discussed now is what we call subject-verb agreement. It means the subject and the verb are in agreement. Okay, so this is the first rule of the subject-verb agreement, whereby we add es at the end of our verbs. For subjects, he, she, it in the simple present tense. Remember, for you to add that es at the end of the verb, your verb have to have certain characteristics. And those characteristics are that they need to end with certain letters. Like we saw above, they need to end with ch, sh, zz, x, z, consonant plus o. Okay? Right. So let's go to the second rule. So rule 2 says, when do we use V1 plus IES? When do we use the verb ending with IES? In rule 1, we looked at V1 ending with ES. Don't forget that. Now we look at verb ending with IES. So for which verbs, right, do we put the suffix meaning an ending IES? It says here, for subjects, he, she, and it, in the simple present tense, for verbs that have the last two letters, consonant plus one. So, if the last two letters of your verb are consonant plus the one, so a consonant followed by the letter one, in the simple present tense for subject he, she, it, what do? We remove the y and replace it with IES. So we remove the y, we take out the y, and we replace it with IES. Let's do some examples. We have a verb here, try. It's in the simple present tense for subject he, she, it. What do? The rule says we remove the y. We cross out the y, as you can see here. And then after crossing it out, we are left with TR. And then in place of the y, we add IES. And the word or the verb becomes tries. Let's try another verb. We have the verb cry in the simple present tense for subject he, she, it. What do? We remove the y. We are left with CR. In place of the y, we add IES. And the verb becomes cries. Okay? So this is also what we call subject verb agreement. Okay, perfect. Let's keep on moving. Let's keep on moving. Let's go to rule 3. So rule 3. When do we use V1 or the verb in its infinitive form plus the S at the end? As you know, for some verbs, we just add S at the end. But for which verbs, we need to understand this. For which verbs do we do that? Okay? So the rule says for subjects he, she, and it in the simple present tense. For verbs that don't belong to rule 1 and rule 2, what do? We add S at the end of that verb. So it means if the verb does not hold the properties that we talked about in rule 1 and rule 2, then we just add S at the end of that verb for subjects he, she, and it in the simple present tense. Example, play, the verb play. You can see here, the last 2 letters are vowel plus Y. Okay, not consonant plus Y, but vowel plus Y. So we can clearly see that this verb does not belong to rule 1, and certainly it does not belong to rule 2. So what do? We just add S at the end, then play becomes plays. Next verb, bow. Bow does not belong to rule 1, and it does not belong to rule 2. Because here, right, we can see it ends with OO. And this property doesn't fit rule 1 and rule 2 as explained above. So what do? We just add S at the end. So bow becomes bows. Next verb, the verb ride. Ride ends with TE. The last 2 letters are TE. So this property does not belong to rule 1, and it doesn't belong to rule 2. Therefore, we just add S at the end of ride. Then ride becomes rides. This rule is also called the subject-verb agreement. Okay? Great. So the rules are shaping up nicely. We did 3 rules. So now we need to go to the 4th rule. So the 4th rule is when do we use V1, meaning just V1, without adding ES, without adding IES, and also without adding S. So in which situation or which situation do we not add anything at the end of the verb? The rule says for subjects I, you, they, and we, So it's no longer he, she, it now. It's subject, I, you, they, and we. In the simple present tense, use the verb V1. So it means if your subject is I, if your subject is you, if your subject is they, if your subject is we, in the simple present tense, then use the verb as it is. Do not change it at all. For example, do for subjects I, you, they, we, it becomes do. We don't do anything to it. Why? Because our subject is I, you, they, or we. So we don't do anything to the verb. We leave it in its original infinitive form. The same with buy. Buy becomes buy. It becomes it. This is also what we call subject-verb agreement. So it means if your subject is I, you, they, and we in the simple present tense, your verb, right? Your verb doesn't change. Your verb remains in its infinitive original form. Perfect. So these are the 4 rules. Okay? We can now use these 4 rules to do some exercises. So let's look at those exercises. So the exercise says, change the following sentences into the simple present tense positive sentences. So we need to change the following sentences into the simple present tense positive sentences. Right? So let's see how we can do this. So we have a sentence here. Tom kicked the ball very well. Okay? So we've got Tom. Tom is the name of a person. Usually it is given to a boy or a male person. So we assume Tom, it's a he. Okay? That's the first thing that we need to look at, the subject. So the subject, it's a he. Okay? And once we have established what the subject is, we need to look at the verb. So what properties does the verb hold? We look at the last 2 letters, the C and the K. So the C and the K ending does not belong to the first rule, nor does it belong to the second rule, the one where we said the verb needs to end with a consonant plus a one. Also, this cannot belong to rule 4 because rule 4 dealt with the subject I, you, they, we. It didn't deal with he, she, it. And here we have he. So the only rule in which this sentence belongs to is rule 3, whereby we just add s at the end of the verb. So the sentence becomes Tom kicks the ball very well. Okay? Let's look at the next example. A baby sometimes cries over nothing. Okay? So we have a baby here, subject, a baby, which can be a he or a she. Okay? So we know our subject. Then we look at our verb. Our verb, you can see it's cry. It ends with R and a Y, which is a consonant plus a Y. Therefore, this sentence belongs to rule 2, verbs that end with consonant plus a Y. What do? We remove the Y. We replace the Y with the IES, and therefore a sentence becomes a baby sometimes cries over nothing. Right? Let's move on. The next sentence. Mike play football every Monday. Play, as you've seen in one of our examples when we looked at the rules, play belongs to rule 3 because it doesn't fit the properties of the verbs in rule 1 and in rule 2. Therefore, rule 3 says we just add S at the end of the verb play. So our sentence becomes Mike plays football every Monday. Let's move right along. Next verb. I walk to work every morning. So you have the subject I. The moment you have the subject I, it means your sentence or your verb, or let's just say the sentence. The sentence cannot belong to rule 1, it cannot belong to rule 2, and certainly cannot belong to rule 3. And therefore, it belongs to rule 4. And rule 4 says we don't do anything to the verb for subjects I, you, they, and we. Therefore, the sentence becomes, I walk to work every morning. Next sentence. We drink orange juice every day. So again, the subject belongs to rule 4. For subjects I, you, they, we. In the simple present tense, we don't do anything to the verb. We leave it in its original infinitive form, and therefore the sentence becomes, we drink orange juice every day. Okay, let's move. Next up, you sing with the choir on Sundays. Subject, you, it belongs to rule 4. We don't do anything to the verb for subjects I, you, they, we in the simple present tense. The sentence becomes, you sing with the choir on Sundays. Next up, they run together every morning. Again, subject they in the simple present tense. We don't do anything to the verb if the subject is I, you, they, or we. Therefore, the sentence is, they run together every morning. Next, Ken and Tom dance very well. So here we have he and he, right? So we don't have one he, we have 2 he. Therefore, this sentence is the same as they, or rather the subject is the same as they. Okay? So we don't do anything to the verb for the subject they. So a sentence is, Ken and Tom dance very well. Next up, Sylvia and I like rice and chicken. So we've got the subject, she, and another subject, I, which can be he, okay? So you've got she and he, she and I, which is the same as we. Why? Because I'm including myself, I. So the moment when I'm saying other people and I, so that is we. So it means the subject is we. So it belongs to rule 4. Then we don't do anything to the verb. So the sentence is Sylvia and I like rice and chicken. Okay. So these were the exercises that we did under the simple present tense part 1, positive verb sentence structure. In this lesson, we looked at when we use the simple present tense, and we said we use it to talk about our habits or our routines, or the actions that we normally do, or the actions that normally happen. After that, we looked at the subject-verb agreement rules to help us determine for which verbs do we add es, for which verbs do we add ies, for which verbs do we add just s, and for which subjects do we not change the verb at all. Lastly, we did the exercises to apply Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3, and Rule 4. Perfect. So, in the next lesson, we are going to look at the simple present tense negative verb sentence structure, and we will also do the exercises. That's the end of this lesson. I hope you learned as much as possible, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this lesson. I hope to see you in the next one. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye and take care.